You are tuned to Cafe Cabaret, sponsored by the Middle East Cafe at 472 Massachusetts Avenue. Portions of tonight's presentation were recorded live at the Middle East Cafe. My name is Francis DiMenno. Tonight we feature part 2 of the Wrong Heroes tribute to conservative icon Lush Rambo, entitled, So You Didn't Listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for the Wrong Hero.
Thank you. Sean, thank you. Hi, I'm the Wrong Hero, and once again this week, I'm filling in for my good friend Lush Rambo. And last week we read from his multi-million-dollar selling book, The Way Things Ain't. This week, we're going to read from his new multi-million-dollar selling book called So You Didn't Listen.
We couldn't hear.
And this is the introduction. Who would have thought that a book of warmed over and largely sterile conservative nostrums would have become such a huge bestseller? How is it that my bogus old think that was yesterday's news in 1973 is now, all of a sudden, so popular? Simple. People say all the time they don't really care about politics because they don't know what to think. Well, finally, here's somebody for all those people who don't think. Me, Lush Rambo. In an age of thoughtlessness, I define the spirit of thoughtless inquiry. That's why I had my staff put together my first book. That's why all the drivel that didn't make it into the first book is stuffed into this one. Besides, all that stuff is out of date now. Anyway, I'm not just looking to make liberals look sick. I want to exude more of my oafish charm, which renders intellectuals speechless and makes troglodytes jump up and down and bang big sticks and rocks together for joy. Because there's only one man big enough to take on President Ivy League and his gang of namby-pamby left-wing traitors, and that's me, Lush Rambo.
Who?
Lush Rambo. Remember the name, or else when I come into power, I'll have it branded on your forehead. President Bush was a man of the people who wouldn't eat broccoli. I am a Midwestern boy, born and raised, and I have a strong dislike for certain spices, especially sage. So you needn't worry about finding any sagacity or sage advice in this book, any more than there was in the last one. So you didn't listen. And now I would like to read Mr. Soundman, a little less echo, a little more treble. Boost the treble because my fat, oafish voice sounds good when you jack that treble button all the way up to 11, like this, so I sound like I'm just gonna have several hits of helium. I would like to preface this, there's a $5 word, preface, this second volume of my collected musings with these quotes from some famous intellectuals you might have heard of, or maybe not, since all but one of them, actually all of them, have been safely dead for over a century, which means their works are in the public domain, and I get to keep every single penny of the $15 million I stand to make from this second collection of mine. All All kinds of people are good, except those who are boring. Voltaire said that. Only he is successful in his business who makes that pursuit which affords him the highest pleasure sustain him. Henry David Thoreau. The advantage of doing one's praising for oneself is that one can lay it on so thick and in exactly the right places. Samuel Butler. A thing is important if anyone think it is important. William James. Suspicion is the companion of mean souls and the bane of all good society. Thomas Paine. I call that mind free which jealously guards its intellectual rights and powers, which calls no man master, which does not content itself with a passive or hereditary faith, which opens itself to light whensoever it may come, which receives new truth as an angel from heaven. William Ellery Channing said that. And finally, since fortune is all-powerful, let us follow her whither she calls. Some old Dago said that. I think his name was Virgil. Now, isn't it amazing how I got most of these quotes from Bartlett's 13th edition, Centennial Edition, and nobody in the media has called me on it? Isn't that delightful? I didn't have to read any of them boring books. I just got out my old Bartlett's and there I went. Yes, sir. I'm a slick one, all right. Especially after I've had a meal with lots of butter, then my flesh shines a little more. Now, some of you might not be familiar with the Lush Rambo lexicon. So I'd like to, you too can speak Ramboese if you listen. Now, here are some of the things that recur repeatedly in my discourses. Crown Royal, my favorite drink. Lifted Pinky Pinkos. They can drink all the tea in China till it's coming out of their ears, and I'll still say they stink. Vote Democrat. Vote Democrat and fall off the face of the earth as far as I'm concerned. Liberals and other filth. My catchphrase for people who refuse to vote Republican. Liberals and other filth. Titty rump, titty rump, titty rump, rump, rump. My attempt at a coarse sexual innuendo. Having my cake and eating it too. Saying something outrageous, and if you don't agree, I was only kidding anyway, and if you do agree, I was right on the money the whole time. See? See, isn't that slick? I told you I was slick. What he said. When my callers have something on their minds and nothing to say, I encourage them to recite the phrase, what he said. So I can squeeze in a message from my sponsor while they're humphering around. And of course, what he said heads are people who listen faithfully to my show. 99.82. The percentage of the media market who can tune in to my show, the Lush Rambo Show. MGBGB. Me, good, big government, bad. That goes without saying. MGBGBBG. Me, good, big government, bad broadcast group. Its only purpose is to broadcast me, because I'm so hefty, I'm frequently mistaken for an entire group of broadcasters. Save the whales cretins. People who blubber about big, stupid fish. What about me? Who's going to save me when I wash up with the tide? The big anger. Me. Lush Rambo. Girls. Girls are good women who don't mind being referred to as girls. Bums. The homeless. This great land, the United States. Burrhead, the former mayor of New York. The Italian guy, the current governor of New York. Stainhead, the former leader of the evil empire. Heartless shelters, where I go to hide from all the so-called homeless bums. Son of Ronald, me, Lush Rambo. I have no political aspirations, but it doesn't hurt to advertise. The Goodness Extractor. Whenever my callers get frisky, I zap them with my ray gun until they quiet down. Union for the Study of Rambo Culture, my cute little nickname for my show. Superman as prosecuting attorney, my methodology for proving my points. Smarter than the average bore, my motto. Cheerleader for the side that's already won, my gimmick. Potholes on the road to prosperity, liberals. Semi-literate H.L. Mencken, my appeal. The other burrhead, that liberal black preacher off in God knows who land. McKeesport, Pennsylvania, the depressing mill town where I'd still be stranded if a well-heeled big shot hadn't come along to pave my way to radio stardom. President Reagan, the only president I ever cared about, even though I never got the chance to vote for him since I didn't register to vote until 1986. Lush Rambo videos, available from me, Lush Rambo, for only $25. I'll show them my motivation for doing the show. I love humanity with gravy. That's why I'm so successful. What's the matter with God? We're okay. A message I use to silence my detractors. Glandularly challenged. A nice way of saying fat. Reports, my personal firecrackers. My God's bigger than your God. My God eats eternity ration. That's nothing but the truth, folks. And these kids today, that's my catch-all phrase. For anybody under the age of 40 who doesn't listen to my show. Hey, you bums, quit smoking cigarettes off there in the alcove and get your asses in here. I'll tell you, you can't get good help anymore. Yeah. I'll tell you. Yeah. Well, I can see that I'm rapidly losing your interest, so I'll just read chapter 1 of this masterpiece, and I'll proceed to go about my business. Chapter 1 is called, I Had to See a Man About a Dog. And it goes like this. I think it's time they apologize to a great American. Me. Because this whole book is about how it's not fair how people say I'm not fair. It's not fair for liberals to say that influential people are opening doors for me. That's not true. I always enter buildings from the side which has the loading dock. It's not fair that the IRS expects us to overpay on our taxes. I'll tell you what I did. Want to know a little secret, folks? I sent the IRS a picture of money, and I wrote on the back of it, I said, this is a picture of the money you would have gotten if you had had the compassion to treat me with one iota of human decency and dignity. But since you did not, you can go whistle for your money, you tin horn chiselers. Of course, I didn't sign my name to it. What do you think, I'm goofy? Oh, hi, how are you? Hey, you're not wearing a suit and tie. You don't look like a prosperous white man to me. But I'll tell you what, you can come on in anyway. I hate the liberal media. They label everything that happens that they don't like a crisis, like me, Lush Rambo. I know how hateful the media are because I've read dozens of newspapers every day, and I've noticed something very interesting. How's come they don't do a story about me, Lush Rambo, and how great I am? That proves the liberal media bias of the press, or, as I like to call them, the media industrial complex. Liberals are basically slave owners. And if Lincoln were alive today, he would realize what a rotten scheme Social Security really is. Unlike conservatives, who have only a vested interest in returning to the Stone Age, welfare liberals only exist to spend my hard-earned moolah on crackpot, make-work schemes that only make the unemployment problem worse. Why don't they pump all that money into the military? Because you know something, folks, welfare loafers look good in shiny uniforms. I guess I'm just an old-fashioned guy, but I'll try one of those newfangled mixed drinks if you're buying. Otherwise, you're probably just as bad as one of them unprincipled, socialistic, atheistic liberals who want to share everybody else's wealth but their own, which is a laugh because they don't even have 2 nickels to rub together, so they rub 2 pennies together because copper conducts electricity more efficiently than nickel, and because it's a further chance to insult a great Republican president, which is Abraham Lincoln! Try it sometime. Try to get a liberal to buy you around. They always mumble some excuse about having to see a man about a dogma. That's because liberals want you to think that you can't afford to buy your own drinks. That every round should be on the house, courtesy the United States government, or as I like to call him, Uncle Sucker. That's why liberals are so low on the food chain, and 2-fisted booze hounds like me are top dog. Believe me, nobody ever handed me my first drink. I had to belly up to the bar and order it myself. And it was tasty. And life was good. Because I knew how to keep my chin up. And my other chin. And my other chin. To conclude this chapter, I've looked at life from both sides. And you better believe that when you're as hefty as me, that takes a long time to go from one side to the other, looking. So, I want you to pay close attention to the rest of this book. I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never remember, especially if you had a few of those old fashions I was talking about earlier. I'm Lush Rambo. Please, you're embarrassing me. No, I don't deserve this. I really don't. Shut up! Thank you.
Hi, I'm the Wrong Hero, welcoming you back to the claustrophobic studio set of the Lush Rambo Show. And we're going to continue reading from Lush Rambo's latest book entitled So You Didn't Listen. Now, this is chapter 2 of that fine book, and it's called I Make Straw Men Fall Down and Go Boom. It's time they apologize to a great American. Me. Now, I was hobnobbing with one of my celebrity pals, I forget which, except it was probably Bill Bennett, who called me our greatest living American, and who's going to be president someday, just you wait and see. It might have been him, it probably was. I throw his name in every chance I get. But anyway, he said something to me, if it was him, like, that I'll never forget. He said, it ain't the meat, it's the emotion. In other words, it's not the crazy things you say, it's the crazy determination in which you keep repeating all that crazy talk, like a non-stop broken record until it begins to sink into people's noggins that you believe every darn word of it, whether you do or not. Now, my motto is, even if you go into the toilet, make sure you go in as number 1, not number 2. And make sure you make a grab for the big ring, even if it's only the ring around the toilet bowl. Now, I say, if you want to make it into the big time, you've got to have that big time optimism and that small town glint of madness in your eyes that comes only from being mercilessly heckled and taunted by yokels during the bulk of your adolescence. And believe me, my adolescence was pretty bulky, and a bunch of other things too. And now, just when I've made it big, a bunch of chicken littles want a level playing field all over again so we can start right back to square one. Well, I say it's spinach, and I say to hell with it. And furthermore, I'm chicken big, and I say the sky... No, I'm chicken big and I say the ground is falling up. That's what I wanted to say. So, people ask me why I equate politics with sports as often as I do, which is practically all the time. The answer is simple. Politics is sports for people who are too fat to run. But the liberals, they don't see that. They want us all to eat tofu and rabbit food and play frisbee with dogs with bandanas tied around their necks. And nobody keeps score because they're afraid the loser's feelings might get hurt. People like that deserve a swift kick in the seat of the pants and a quick bop on the head so they can see the stars instead of falling flat on their faces. Maybe before some of the things I said, maybe before I had my tongue in my cheek. Maybe on rare occasions I used to have my tongue planted firmly in my cheek, my right cheek. But not anymore, because it got lost in there. I get to have it both ways, actually. When I say something you don't like, I'm only kidding. But when I say something you agree with, I'm as wise as King Solomon, Albert Einstein, and Ronald Reagan, all rolled up in the one big fat sweaty ball. And I never fail to come out and say how smart you are for listening to me instead of wasting your time researching primary sources and intelligently discussing the issues with educated people who actually read books and magazines with more than one word in the title. And another thing I want to say, don't let the big shots push you around, because you want to listen to my show. My show continues to grow year after year, and so do I, because there's no question in my mind that I'm right, extremely far right. And there's no question in my mind that people are far smarter than their basic stupidity tells them they are. That's my message, and it's growing continuously, and so am I. Who is in my audience? Fur-wearing conservationists, leather-wearing animal lovers, law-abiding vigilantes, and people who love this country so much that they get out of paying their taxes any way they can so the government doesn't become dependent on their handouts. Ordinary anonymous John and Jane Doe and other people whose names I won't mention. People who just want to be left to have their own opinions and who have the quiet courage to let me do their thinking and talking for them. Because remember, folks, nothing exceeds like excess. And I should know. I wrote the book. And you should know. You're holding it in your hands. And if you want to impress your friends with how smart you are, my suggestion is that you hold it right side up. This is chapter 4. It's called America is Catching Its Breath. And you'll excuse me for a second, but I have to catch my breath. There. Whew. And believe me, when I catch my breath, I've got a hell of a big breath that I have to catch. America is not tired. America is catching its breath, getting its second wind. And I'm America's #1 windbag, so I should know. When you want advice on hot air, who do you turn to? An Eskimo or me? I know all about how meddlesome government can be. One time, I was standing waiting for a cab in a loading zone,
and the city tried to have me towed away. All I can say is, it's a good thing that I had $50 in my pocket. That's because I'm a successful man, in spite of the media industrial complex and the weirdo peaceniks in the White House. Or maybe because of them. I never could get that straight. Now ask yourself this. What if I had been some kind of starry-eyed, dope-smoking, peacenik liberal back in my high school days? Where would I be today? I'd probably be some hick DJ off in some Rust Belt hellhole, living on pizza burgers, malt liquor, and Cheez-Its. I'd be doing ribbon-cutting ceremonies for the benefit of a bunch of unemployed bohunks with garlic breath and yellow dentures off in some godforsaken shopping mall. My total listening audience would be probably about 20, and I'll bet you 8 of them would be cows. And the liberals would control 100% of the media all the time. But I didn't take that road. Instead, I took a chance. I thought about the audience I wanted to reach. The slow ones. The ones who had a hard time in high school. The ones who didn't finish college, maybe. The grassroots of this country who were sick of being trampled on by loafers who want the government to hold their hand. The people with the 20th century conveniences and the 19th century opinions. The one who know for a fact that there's nothing wrong with this country that a can-do attitude and getting rid of all the liberals couldn't cure. I thought about that audience, and then I thought about the best way to reach them. And I figured I would do it by painting them a picture. In that picture, everything that was wrong with this country would be because the government was out to get them. And everything that was right with this country would be on account of how the people of the United States don't let their elected officials run their lives with their ridiculous taxes and laws and formulas. I figured these people may not read much, but they listen to the radio and watch their TVs every waking hour of the day. So I learned to speak slowly, raising my voice only for emphasis. I learned how to be sympathetic but assertive, how to say, "How are you? Shut up," in the same breath. I became the lowest of the low. And in a democracy, that's how you make it to the top. To the top of the top. To me, Lush Rambo. Chapter 4. The Nude Democrats. The Democrats aren't the new Democrats. Don't let them fool you, folks. They're the nude Democrats. And that's the naked truth. Do yourself a favor and take a tip straight from the horse's mouth, and I don't mean Tip O'Neill. Who cares if it's all wet and slimy, this tip that you take straight from the horse's mouth? So are the Democrats, even when they're not running around naked. Bill Clinton didn't really win the election. If you took every single one of those people who voted for Ross Perot, never mind that they shared his hatred for George Bush, and made them vote for Bush, Bush would have won. Simple arithmetic, folks. Convoluted logic, but logic was never one of my strong points, or yours. And neither was arithmetic, or else you wouldn't be listening to my show. So let's stick to simple arithmetic and a crudely thought out version of recent American history. Liberals, 1968. Ugh, riots, Humphrey. Humphrey okay. Not like communists. Radicals, 1972. Take over. McGovern, honest communist. Him lost. 1976. Carter, him bad.
liberal. 1984, Mondale. Democrats make him run with girl. Ugh. 1988, Dukakis. Red. Me no like. 1992, Clinton. Hick. Him lie. Him red. Him no like red man. Him have red friends. Him squaw want to sell papoose downriver to Great White Father. Her bad. Clinton bad. Him give away our wampum. No fight. Make peace with enemy. Speak with forked tongue. Go figure. So you didn't listen? I say, ugh. Because, folks, basically, Bill Clinton is a presidential Pez dispenser. His sugar-coated promises are broken before they even come out of his mouth. Sure, I got the idea from Spy magazine, but Clinton tells at least 100 lies. And that's the honest truth. I'm not going to back it up, but that's the truth. Chapter 5, More Money. The president doesn't want us to make more money. Instead, he wants to preside over the 7 lean years, like it says in the Bible. Why is this? Because when he was growing up, nobody was constantly at his shoulder telling him that it couldn't be done, that you couldn't make money by taxing the rich and trying to dictate to the marketplace. The marketplace is all grown up now. The marketplace makes its own decisions. And folks, let me make one thing clear. Let me tell you one fact. The marketplace doesn't take dictation. The marketplace has secretaries that do that for it. Just like me. How do you suppose I wrote this book? Do you think I got my hands dirty? Fat chance of that. Let me tell you about how this country got to where it is today. Not by letting poor people tell it what to do, not by paying athletes starvation wages like we pay our school teachers and other liberals, not by standing around on street corners and being jealous of what the other countries have, not by breaking into drugstores and stealing the medicines that the hard-working and honest pharmaceutical companies spent so many man-hours in developing. Our country didn't get to where it is today by spitting on the system of free enterprise. No, our country got to where it is today by spitting on its hands, rolling up its sleeves, and hiring minimum wage workers to point the engines of destiny in the right direction. And I do mean the right direction. Because, folks, take it from me, Les Rambo. I never met a payroll I didn't like. Chapter 6. Now, a lot of these chapters are going to be really short because I know your attention spans are limited. And so is my ability for bringing up a whole bunch of facts on command. This is entirely spontaneous, by the way, I'll have you know. This is all in my head right here. I don't need a computer, it's all in my head. Chapter 6. History is a lie. History is a lie unless I'm making it up on the spot. Then it's the unvarnished, unalloyed, and mostly unedited truth. Like I'm going to tell you right now. Columbus were good. The Indians was savagery. Columbus brought good savagery to this country, the kind that creates jobs. The Pilgrims were great. They knew their Bible. They tried sharing stuff, and when that didn't work, they resorted to the whip. A few shirkers may have tasted the lash, but before too long, not only did they pay off all their debts, but they even attracted a bunch of deadbeats from Europe. And let me tell you, Mr. Whip was kept mighty busy lashing the freeloaders in the line. It was a short step from there to the Constitution, which is basically a subset of the Bible. And everybody knew both of them by heart. Mr. Whip's work, I might add. As a matter of fact, Mr. Whip did a lot of good work during the early years of this country. The founders of this country spent part of every day cracking open their Bible and the rest of the day cracking that cat-o'-nine tails. That Whip cleared forests, trained our school children, built the railroads, made the trains run on time, and won both of our world wars. But Mr. Whip has been getting mighty dusty lately. But don't get discouraged. Before too long, we'll grease her up and then this country will start to move on again. Chapter 7. How to dust off that whip that I was just talking about. Before I begin, I just want to say that I don't believe that all the liberals belong in the 7th circle of hell. In fact, I'm pretty sure that a good many of them deserve to be in limbo, which is where a good many of them were, in fact, during the entirety of the 1980s, which is why the 1980s were so great. Take it from me, Lush Rambo. No, there's two types of liberals. Those I can confuse with my seductive humor, my distrust of any authority other than my own, my ability to pander to the superstitious and uneducated, and with the endearing way in which I manage to voice even the most egregiously backwards and unprogressive ideas. Those liberals I can tolerate. No, it's the liberals who have spent years in opposing my good-natured, if somewhat draconian conservatism, who I abhor. The bandwagon-jumping, mealy-mouthed adherents of mumbo-jumbo, democratically elected government claptrap band-aids whose lips can only form one sound, and that sound is the war on poverty. I say that what we ought to have is a war on poetry. Get rid of the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the National Endowment for the Arts, and spend the money we save on getting rid of rap singers and liberal professors and atheistic school teachers and all them others. During the 1960s, this great this great land of ours went straight down the toilet, and everybody was too busy crying peace, love, dove to call the Roto-Rooter man. The 1960s is when we decided to listen to communists instead of the wisdom of our founding fathers. We decided to get rid of the Bible and hard work and replace it with textbooks written by secular humanists and wholesale looting. These bums couldn't even be bothered to master the rudiments of retail looting. No, for them, opening up a rent-to-own store was too much hard work, so it was wholesale looting for them and their kind, many of whom are running this great country of ours straight into the ground, even as I speak. Instead of having President Looter and his wrecking crew of liberal policymakers, why can't we have President Bible and his crack team of whip-em-in-the-line conservatives? Huh? What I'm really trying to tell you with the radio and TV shows of mine is that the old ways are best, and we better dust off that whip and start learning to give the lifted pinky finger pinkos the old what for. Remember, you can't make popcorn without cracking open a few ears of corn. Because believe me, folks, otherwise the blood will flow. I didn't get to be the spokesman for orange juice and Snapple beverages for nothing. I know how to keep reform bottled up. I know how to snap the whip and keep my adherents in a blind frenzy. And I'm not afraid of blood. My blood type is B positive. Also, my personal philosophy. Chapter 8. The key of C. And C stands for conservative. For me, this book here enables me, Lush Rambo, to talk on and on in the key of C for conservatism about how America isn't getting enough of vitamin V for values. Values which get people going to the stores to buy my book. Values which are valuable. Values which the media industrial complex don't share, or else they wouldn't be doing their darndest to see that every American turns into a mindlessly liberal robot which doesn't even work a good percentage of the time. Remember Vice President Quayle? Well, the liberals don't want you to know it, but the V in Vice President stood for values, and the Q in Quayle stood for high IQ. And remember William Bennett, who I hope gets to be president someday so he can get rid of the capital gains tax first thing off, and I can really start to rake the moolah in? Well, the B in his name, Bennett, stands for Be Optimistic. And it's a message we should all take heed of. And remember how instead of birth control and abortion and divorce, we used to have absolutely no sex at all, and unwanted children, and incompatible married couples chained together in total misery for the sake of the children? Well, I say it's time the government stops giving money away to encourage criminal behavior in kindergarten children and instead uses the money to make sure that everybody in the United States is happily married and has 9 children. Because baseball teams make money, you know. Chapter 9, Gun Stock. I'm against residents of inner cities having guns. But when a bunch of people off in Colorado, which the liberals want you to think is the hate state, when a bunch of people off in Colorado want to shoot off their rifles and let off a little bit of that good old-fashioned American steam, I'm all for it. That was the idea behind gun stock. Why should liberals have all the fun? So I took this idea I've been kicking around to have a sort of Gettysburg reunion for right-wing conservatives, and I let the honest people of this country do all the promotional work, except of course that I mentioned it several dozen times on my radio show, which, I shouldn't have to remind you yet again, reaches an audience of 21 million people. And before you know it, there were 100,000 happy individualists all flocking together to be a part of one big happy, litter-free, fresh-faced, optimistic group of never say die, authentically independent Americans. And for all of you who are there who didn't get a copy of my monthly newsletter, you can get one for only $2.50 or send $30 for a year's subscription, and that way you don't have to keep sending the money in every week, and checks cost money to write, so just write one big one for $30 and you'll actually be saving money. Or you can get a videotape of the entire event, Gunstock, for only $25, or if for some reason your wife won't let you spend that kind of money, why, you can hold your very own Gunstock in your very own backyard and raise the money yourself, and I'll be glad to get it from you too. Chapter 10. I tell you, the 80s were great. I seem to remember devoting an entire chapter of my last book to the topic of how great the 80s were, so I'm going to talk really fast. But memories are short. For instance, I can't remember whether it was 59 consecutive months of growth, like it says on page 110, or 96 months, as it says on page 113. But who cares? Anyway, in my role as the poster boy for the Goldwater Republicans in the world's longest and longest-running right-wing infomercial, I consider it my duty to pound this fact into your heads time and time again. And I'll say it again, and again and again. I tell you, the 80s were great. It is because I have made this my message that the liberal news media, talking heads, and out-of-it commentators have labeled my show a platform for illogic. It is why they have said my listeners come from nut country, It is why they have relegated my best-selling books to the section in the bookstores marked children's fiction. It is why I have been called off the wall and arrogant and self-indulgent and a loose cannon and crass and a court jester for the politically incorrect. Well, I'm getting sick of all these labels. Instead of slinging around vicious, unsubstantiated labels, I will toss out some optimistic, substantiated libels. Sure, in the 80s, the rich got richer, but the poor got some too. And those who didn't manage to get theirs just weren't trying very hard now, were they? Sure, there was a tax cut and more defense spending, but the liberals increased the deficit just to make conservatives look bad. Back in the 80s, liberals spent all their time boo-hooing about how the trickle-down theory wasn't working and about how even when it did, it was just all crumbs from the rich man's table. Maybe so, but they were mighty big crumbs. And furthermore, many of these crumbs are now dictating terms to the rich from their throne in the Oval Office and doing their darndest to implement a trickle-up theory of poverty for the 90s. Anyway, you don't have to listen to me on this subject, not when you can refer to the collected speeches of Ronald Reagan, especially the one where he says that no nation has ever taxed itself into prosperity, which is my favorite, even though he cites no sources to back his argument up. As far as I'm concerned, everything Reagan ever said ought to be carved into stone and sold at flea markets so more poor people can enter the middle class. But I guess the Democrats wouldn't like there to be no poor people because then they wouldn't be able to say how lousy the 80s were. In the future, instead of the Reagan-Bush years, historians will no doubt refer to this as the Reagan-Bush, how did that Democratic pinko get into the White House years? Pretty good thing it was only for one term. Because I look to the future. I love this country. I love this country and how it's promoted me to a position of respectability, even as I continue to make big bucks attacking its elected leaders. You can bet that wouldn't have happened in the 1980s. Chapter 11. The time is right for me, and here's why. The 90s will be good to me because the time is right for me, Lush Rambo. And here's why. The very day Clinton was elected to office, I had all this anti-liberal stuff I've been jotting down on the backs of cocktail napkins since the Carter administration, all neatly filed in an old pizza carton and ready to go. 12 years worth of great material that I never got a chance to use, plus some stuff I had left over from 1968 to boot. Basically, 25 years worth of A material about the 60s and welfare chiselers and bomb-throwing radicals and unwashed hippies just percolating around inside of that empty pizza box. Because you have to understand, I was a square from nowhere back in the 60s. I had a 50s haircut, I never wore a pair of blue jeans in my life, and because of all that, I was a Republican. There's an old saying about how nobody over 40 is a socialist, and nobody under 40 is anything but. But I couldn't be bothered to look up the original quote, so I'll just mangle it a little to suit my argument, which is what I do most of the time anyway, even though nobody ever calls me on it, probably because the people who can stand to listen to me for 3 hours a day aren't exactly in the same intellectual batting cage as Mr. Albert Einstein, if you get my drift. Where was I? Oh, yeah, if the government can't stop crime, give everybody a rifle, except Congress. They've been picking our pockets for years.
legally. You might say they've been rifling through our pockets, so we hardly have to give them a rifle now, do we? So, anyway, I say, let's stop all these government entitlements. The only thing people should be entitled to is to have their own rifles. So when congressional scofflaws come knocking at the door trying to make peace-loving liberals pay taxes to enforce the same laws that congressmen don't have to follow, these peace-loving citizens can say, "Go away, I'm cleaning my rifle, and don't come back some other time either," just like the conservatives already do. And you can bet one thing, those scofflaws in Congress will sit up and listen to that message. Otherwise, they might be deafened by one or two warning blasts from good old Mr. Shotgun. And I'm not talking about the hit by Junior Walker and the All-Stars. Like I said, I used to be a DJ and I can throw in these musical references because I know all about music. Even though easy listening stations are advertised on my television show. Better for the demographics. Anyway, what I'm getting at here is, the more handouts and goodies our citizens take from good old Uncle Sugar, the more their teeth will rot and fall out, and the less the laws of this great land will have bite. Instead of putting the bite on Uncle Sucker and paving the way for Joe Stalin-style socialism, maybe all these entitlements parasites should bite the bullet and say no to taxes. In fact, maybe the bloated bureaucrats in Stalingrad by the Potomac should tighten their budgets and freeze federal spending and heat their offices with some of those useless cherry trees they've got growing there, and stop lying to the American people about needing more and more of their hard-earned money to keep the pot boiling under the economy. And I hope they're listening. Chapter 12. Healthcare is just another crummy racket. Healthcare is just another crummy racket. You don't see me moaning for free healthcare. That's because I'm as healthy as an ox. I've got flies in my ears, stones in my belly, and I smell like raw sewage. And the happiest time of my life was when I couldn't even afford that. But managed healthcare threatens to rob us of the happiness we felt back when we were young and couldn't afford to get sick, so we didn't. Managed healthcare is just another one of those drippy, hippy-dippy ideas from the 60s. Never mind that President Truman came up with it back in 1948. What did he know? He was a Democrat and a failed businessman besides. But I repeat myself. Anyway, here's where I'm tempted to get heavy on you, as they used to say in the 60s, and quote at length the words of the great thinkers of Western civilization. But if you wanted that kind of philosophy, I guess you'd go to the library and actually read them for yourself instead of listening to me. So I won't. Instead, let me say this about the president's wife. She's a girl. And a hippie. And hippies stink. They want to pay people to work even though they don't work. They want everybody to have health care, but only if they get to decide who deserves it. They're the ones who need health care, my friends. Mental health care. Because you'll never get doctors to do their job for free. Not even a hippie doctor on relief. And that is a relief. A real relief. Chapter 13. Me first, Earth last. Let me tell you something. The whole environmental movement is just another big racket designed by Vice President Zappa Sucker-Upper to drain our pockets of all our hard-earned cash. If any of these so-called government, so-called workers had ever held a real job in all their natural-born days, they'd realize one important fact. Those factory smokestacks they're crying about mean jobs for honest, everyday, hard-working Americans. Those pollution-belching automobiles they spend
so much time worrying about are a God-given right. Otherwise, we'd be riding around on bicycle-powered rickshaws and living on rice cakes and rabbit food. And to make matters worse, not only is the vice president one of those lettuce-munching peaceniks, but he's also soft on crime, which means only one thing. Basically, he's a communist. And I'm sure all the trees which were shredded into pulp in order to make the paper which went into this book would agree with me if trees could talk and had feelings, as our vice president obviously believes they do. I'll tell you what else he likes. He likes AIDS, he likes abortion, and he likes acid rock. And he wrote this crazy book full of spurious facts, and he didn't even have the justification of having a popular and successful radio show. He hates pesticides, the nuclear family, and anything else with the word nuclear in it. And he's against states' rights, so you know he's bad news. He wants everybody to work for the government and ride around in solar-powered bicycles, plus he wants to turn us into Japan and get rid of air conditioning. Well, if he's so committed to all this stuff, why doesn't he do it? Huh? I'll tell you what, all this stuff about the ozone hole, why doesn't he look in the mirror? He's got a big hole in his head where his brains should be. And all this stuff about getting rid of pesticides? Well, no wonder he's in favor of that. He's the biggest pest of all. And all this stuff about how we should squander trillions just to protect a bunch of rocks and trees? He's got rocks in his head. And all this stuff about global warming? Somebody should get a slippery elm club and warm his backside. And all this stuff about recycling? Somebody should recycle his head because it's stuffed full of nonsense. And all this stuff about saving the planet? Who's going to save the planet from him and his cockamamie ideas, which should have never seen the light of day in the first place? Because, let's face it, folks, who are you going to believe? Me, Lush Rambo, or Vice President Zappa Sucker-Upper, who wants us all to drive cars like the ones the Flintstones used to drive? You be the judge. Chapter 14. Environmental freaks are crazy. I'm Lush Rambo. I'm judge, jury, and executioner, and let me tell you, folks, I haven't been getting much sleep lately because I've been working 3 full-time jobs instead of marching around in silly protest rallies and crying about how America is squandering its precious resources, because it just ain't happening. Who says so? Me, Lush Rambo. And that should be good enough for the likes of you. Because I've been proved right time and time again. Never mind that the past tense of prove is proven. This is my main point. Liberals want to scare you to death with half-baked allegations, unsourced facts cited out of thin air, and implausible what-if scenarios. I don't want to do any of these things. I am doing them. But at least I admit it. Try to get a liberal to admit to doing anything. If I can get you to think of the liberal left as a bunch of wreck-the-machinery charlatans, I can make even the most rambling right-wing tub-thumping sound like the sweet music of mainstream reasonableness. If I can segregate the left into the back alleys of political discourse, I can capture the center and seal off all discussion of even moderately liberal viewpoints. And let me reiterate, that's a fancy word for saying I'm going to repeat myself. I don't merely want to do these things. My friends, I am doing these things. And I've gotten too powerful for anybody to stop me. I don't believe in Darwinism, unless it's social Darwinism, and then I'm all for it. I say, If the liberals can't compete in the marketplace of ideas, they have no business being there, or anywhere else as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, let me say this. The Bible's right, science is wrong. And if you've read the Bible, and if you believe the part about how if you don't believe the Bible, then you're doomed to go to hell, then you'll believe me. Or else you're doomed to go to hell. And even if you happen to know something about science, it still won't be too hard to believe me once I turn on some of that seductive charm for which I'm justly famous. Listen to me. All the good scientists agree with me, Lush Rambo. When science proves that the Indians practiced strip mining and eroded the soil, science is right because, by saying so, they prove my point. That there's nothing new under the sun, and what goes around comes around, and if you can't stand the heat, then you better put on some sunblock. When science says that thanks to cars we don't need trees anymore, that's good science because it agrees with what I say. And when science says that only you can prevent forest fires, I agree 100,000%. Because if there were no trees, I'd have to print my books on rag bond, and that would drive up costs, and most people wouldn't be able to afford my books, and they'd have to buy my videotapes instead, and that, my friends, simply wouldn't be cost effective. And I'd rather you buy my book so people can see you reading it on airplanes and realize that there's no getting away from me, even at several thousand feet up. But if the liberals had their way, there'd be no airplanes except the ones they get to ride around in, and the forests could burn to a crisp before they'd even lift a pinky to keep them from burning. Unless there were some spotted owls in there, then maybe they'd do something about it. Folks, I'll tell you, I've got nothing against spotted owls. In fact, I'm like an owl. I have a flat face, I hoot a lot, and I endorse my own line of greasy potato chips. But I'm also like a fox. I have a pointy snout, I'm sly, and I like to poke my nose in other people's garbage. Anyway, maybe there is a greenhouse effect, maybe there is another ice age coming, but I don't think so, and I'm not going to worry about it. But I will say this. If there weren't any pesticides, we wouldn't have all these yummy things to eat on our grocer's shelves, and I would lose so much weight that I would have to buy a whole nother wardrobe, and I don't think they still make those suits with the wide lapels, and my ties would look like scarves. And you wouldn't want that. Chapter 15. Me smart, government dumb, and these kids today. Folks, let me tell you, I didn't like school. To me it was sheer drudgery, having to listen without talking whenever I felt like it. I would rather have stayed at home to practice talking in my radio voice. I wasn't ready to listen to some teacher who made less money than my father. It was my voice I wanted to hear being transmitted over the PA system, not the principal's. And by the way, they say the principal is your pal. Sure. All my pals call me on the carpet and chew me out for stuff I didn't do. Sure, the principal is my pal. Anyway, I didn't like school. All that discipline and having to marshal written evidence for the stuff I say. That's not for me. I'd rather go with my gut instincts. And believe me when I say that with a gut like mine, we're talking some mighty large instincts. But when I think about the teachers who made my life a living torment, I do have to say one thing. They're the ones I remember. And they're the ones who motivated me. Motivated me to jump in my Pontiac Le Mans and get the heck away from there as fast as I possibly could. And now, I can look back on those days and smile, knowing that I probably make more money in 1 hour than they make in an entire month. And yet, I'm also sad. Because even though I have no evidence to back me up except hearsay, I know that schools today are even worse than they were back when I was growing up as a youngster. I mean, look at all these schools today. They don't even grade on the curve anymore because they don't even have grades, and most of them probably wouldn't even know how to spell curve. Teachers can't even humiliate the kids into learning stuff like they used to do with me all the time. Now, I'm all for kids learning things, especially if they get their opinions secondhand from the people listening to my show. But these kids today, you can't learn them nothing. All they know how to do is pass tests. That doesn't prepare them for real life situations, like listening to my show or figuring out the sales tax on $24.95, which is the cost of one of my videotapes. My question is, whatever happened to teaching kids using the old carrot and stick method and maybe whacking them one with a stick when they start to doze off in class? No, they don't have that anymore. Now the kids just drop out of high school and hang around on street corners purchasing condoms because their feelings are hurt because you try to bribe them with a lousy carrot. What I say is, stop throwing carrots at these kids and send them out in the wilderness to grow their own, like the pioneers used to do. That way they may not learn how to run a computer, but at least they'll be able to see in the dark because it'll improve their vision at night. Chapter 16. Feminists walk funny. Let me tell you what I think about women. I'm not a male chauvinist. I'm a realist. I don't hate women. I just don't think they're very logical. At least, not until they turn about 40. I think women take up too much of my valuable time, so I don't have an awful lot to do with them unless they listen to my show every day and they know what I'm talking about. If they can put up with my temperamental mood swings, my mischievous bombast, my redundant conservative wit, my shiny face, my insecure narcissism, my inner emptiness, and the fact that I'm ill at ease whenever I'm around them and wish I could be anywhere else doing anything else, then they're not very sensitive and they probably aren't real women at all, and besides, they're only pretending to like me because I have money. But I'll share a little secret with you. I think the best food to use during sex is super glue. Not that it's food. Not that I ever have sex. My sex life is kind of like my laundry. Happens twice a year, weighs 200 pounds, takes 12 hours, costs about $10. Of course, I have all my stuff done in the laundry. I don't actually do the laundry myself, but you get what I'm saying. Anyway, I have yet to find a woman willing to put up with my reclusive paranoia, the way I rustle papers when I read stuff off of them, my spontaneous, dramatic pauses, which I've been practicing for 30 years, and the way I express my opinions in the totally smug, self-satisfied, and confident way, which tells them that I was so traumatized by the way they treated me in high school that I have totally retreated into a totally solipsistic and self-narcotizing narcissism, a self-inflicted torment in a self-absorbed world that no woman can ever rescue me from. So don't even try, ladies. Having said this, can I say a word about feminists? Feminists walk funny. They talk funny, and they frighten me even more than ordinary women do. And believe me, folks, I'm not making this up. In the great scheme of things, men were made to frighten women, and when the women decide to turn the tables on them, I don't know whether I'm coming or going, but chances are I'm going as far away as I can possibly can, which in my case is about 2 or 3 miles a day. So I'd rather not hang around with women because you never know when one of them will turn into a feminist and accuse you of rape, and then there's a messy lawsuit, and that's exactly what I don't need. Not that any right-thinking jury in the land would believe for even 1 minute that I'm capable of even kissing a woman without an enormous effort, let alone performing the rape word. But let me repeat myself. I don't hate women. I just want them to be more like men without acting like men. I just want them to get paid the same for the same work if they insist on going to work and taking jobs away from men instead of staying at home like they oughta. Otherwise, before too long, we'll have stuff like lesbians in our schools and homes, and I have a hard enough time even dealing with plain old women, so I'd rather not even think about that. Chapter 17. Words are dangerous. Words are dangerous. Of course they are. Especially when you repeat them over and over in a kind of mind-numbing mantra which totally distorts their real meanings. Like the liberals do. The low-down liberals. The backbiting, power-hungry, money-grubbing, lying, prevaricating, propagandizing, proselytizing liberals. The mean, shiftless, lazy, good-for-nothing, slack-jawed, mealy-mouthed, cotton-picking liberals. The liberals who can take a simple, harmless word and make it mean something totally different from what it really is. Like the word conservative, or consensus, or silent majority, or popular, or vox populi, or ubiquitous, or omniscient, or influential, or omnipotent. Anyway, what's with all this talk about red ribbons and defense cuts? What we really need is a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree and increased defense spending to bring us the same kind of prosperity we had ever since World War II got us out of the Great Depression. Instead of all this talk about putting people first, why can't we start talking about putting military people first, where they belong, and giving them all the tax dollars, instead of tossing it away on a bunch of moochers who are howling away for welfare and busing and the minimum wage. Then, instead of all this worthless liberal symbolism, we can have the cymbals and drums of the Marine Marching Band as they go marching down Prosperity Street in their quest to make sure America is number one. Words that are music to my ears. Chapter 18. I care more about political correctness than racism. I care more about getting rid of political correctness than I care about doing something about racism. Because racism is a difficult and complex issue, but it sure is easy to blast away at political correctness, and it gets a laugh. And none of these people could beat me up even if they tried, whereas racists are usually mean and full of hatred. And I still remember what happened to that fellow off in Denver who had that talk show and they killed him. And I wouldn't want it to happen to me, so I'm not going to talk about racists. Just because I hate crime doesn't mean I want to do anything special about hate crimes. And neither does Judge Thomas. But let's not talk about him other than to mention that he happens to agree with me. Let's talk about me. Laws against hate crimes don't protect powerful, influential people like me. And believe me, I'm a mighty big target and I need all the protection I can get. So anyway, if the law can't even protect me, then why should we go out of our way to protect minorities from attacks by bigots? Because I'll tell you something, when liberals attack me, nobody prosecutes them for hate crimes. And the kind of troublemakers who get attacked by bigots are not the kind of people who listen to my show, or else they'd keep to themselves a lot more. So I say, hate crime. Don't criminalize the hate. Chapter 19. Conservatives can't be bigots because Lincoln freed the slaves. Conservatives can't be bigots because Lincoln freed the slaves. And there's an awful lot of black people who would agree with me on that one. Notice how I refuse to capitalize the word black. That's because I refuse to capitalize on my great admiration for prominent black individuals, particularly those who happen to be sports figures, preachers, conservative economists, and conservative Supreme Court judges. Why, even Jesse Jackson has come around to my way of thinking, and believe me, in terms of his career, it's not a moment too soon for him. I mean, Clinton is so far to the left that Jesse Jackson had to do something, so I guess he decided to join forces with me. Because, folks, wouldn't it be great if all of a sudden all the black people decided to come back to the party of Abraham Lincoln? Just think of all those votes that could be marshaled to put a real conservative back in the White House. A conservative who doesn't want to hear any more excuses. A conservative who wants to help the rich to help themselves to all the goodies that are out there, and in the process make all sorts of great new jobs for Americans of all races. In other words, a conservative who will not have time to promote racial hatred. A God-fearing, honest conservative who will concentrate his efforts on making this great country into a land where all classes of society can rise just as far as their class will allow them to. Wouldn't that be swell? And besides, conservatives can't be bigots because Lincoln was a Republican and Lincoln freed the slaves. I mean, how many times do I have to repeat myself on this one, folks? So I won't. Instead, we'll go straight to chapter 20, which is called America is Here to Stay. America is here to stay, and I don't care who tries to tell me different. So far, no one. But I'm not taking any chances. When that day comes when someone tries to tell me that America is finished, I'll be ready for them. I'll stand right up and I'll tell them, I don't care what people say. America is here to stay. I don't care what people do. America will never be number 2. Because the generation that fought World War II is great. A great many of them are still around. A great many of them listen to my show. And a great many of them believe every word they hear on my show. Sure, they used to listen to big band jazz and think about the past, but now they listen to my show and it gives them something to look forward to. Basically, they can look forward to having a guy who's only in his mid-40s who thinks just like they do and believes everything they believe and says everything they believe. A guy who will be around with his daily tirades for at least the next 20 years, who will give them something they like to listen to after they retire. A guy whose sloppy reasoning and unoriginal observations mirror their own thought processes exactly. A guy who can demolish their favorite paper tigers and straw men and hobby horses with the best of them. A guy who's willing to rail against the same things they've been preoccupied for at least the last 40 years. A guy who doesn't use as many big words as William F. Buckley and who isn't as vulgar as Saturday Night Live. A guy who gives them the confidence to cling to the same set of beliefs they've had since they were old enough to be conservatives. A guy who knows enough to, every now and then, throw in a funny story or a joke when this political stuff starts to get too serious. A fella who, well, maybe he didn't fight in any wars himself, but who's fighting, and in many cases aggravating, all of the important cultural Civil War issues that drive this great cultural and all-important cultural Civil War. A man who eats and talks enough for 2. and who is pregnant with conservative thoughts. Yeah, I'll bet they're all glad they got a fella like me around. Otherwise, they'd have to spend their golden years listening to long-haired musicians like Beethoven. Folks, I hope I won't shock you with what I'm about to say, but just between you, me, and the lamppost, I think that guy Beethoven was a communist. You ever hear that Fifth Symphony of his? Dun 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 dun. To me it sounds exactly like CCCP, CCCP. And you ever think it's the Fifth Symphony? Like fifth columnists during World War II and communists pleading the Fifth Amendment during the 1950s. I don't know about that Beethoven guy. There's something fishy about him. Anyway, the guys that fought in World War II were real men, not whiners and crybabies like the pack of liberals we got running this country straight into the ground at the present time. Anyway, I hope we don't get into another messy land war somewhere off where we ain't got no business being. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have a lot of guns and butter. Because guns and butter is my bread and butter. Besides, by the way, I like a bread and butter sandwich, especially with one slice of bread between two slabs of butter. Matter of fact, I kind of wish I had one now. Anyway, instead of having an honest-to-goodness World War II veteran in the White House, instead we have a bunch of gutless liberals who would like nothing better than to get us into a quagmire, which I believe is a laundromat run by a duck. Anyway, they want to get us into a quagmire just so they can prove, at least to themselves, how crummy the military is. And folks, believe me, that is the last thing we need right now. Anyway, I never fought in a war myself. I was 1F, or was it 4Y? I disremember which. But that fact makes me actually all the more eager that we honor our brave soldiers who actually did fight off there in the jungles and deserts or wherever it was. I'd like to add a little public service message here, if I may. Employers, don't forget, hire the vet. 'Cause remember, veterans have guns, and they know how to use them. And that's the icing on the cake. Chapter 21. Big government bad, me good. All the famous philosophers whose ideas have turned out to be just plain wrong have one thing in common. They all disagreed with me. And all the great philosophers who turned out to be truly great are all operating on the exact same wavelength as me, yours truly, Lush Rambo. Except these great philosophers, they never had their own radio show, not even Einstein, and certainly not Karl Marx. And I do, so I guess the joke's on them. Anyway, all the great philosophy geniuses all have one thing in common. They all thought that big government was a lousy idea. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a few things that big government can do. It's just that I can't think of anything that's really important right off the top of my head. But look at it this way. In the game of Monopoly, big government owns Boardwalk and Park Place, and yet they refuse to put up any hotels or even houses on it. Plus, they're constantly hoarding all the get-out-of-jail-free cards and swiping money from Community Chest when they think we're not watching them. Plus, they won't let anybody else have a turn at being the banker. What's more, big government controls the Constitution, and that's unconstitutional, and it even says so in the Constitution somewhere. But since big government controls the Constitution, there's not one thing we can do about it now, is there? Anyway, back in the 60s, we used to have creeping socialism. Now, here in the 90s, this country is being run by socialist creeps. And the worst idea of all their crazy smash capitalism schemes is called the minimum wage. Let me tell you something about the minimum wage. The minimum wage wages the maximum harm on business owners whose only business ought to be making a profit instead of having to hold the hand of some undereducated bum too lazy to send away for a study-at-home course on the back of a matchbook so that someday he might even become the foreman of a matchbook factory. Sooner or later, the government is going to go broke from paying loafers not to work, and businesses are going to go broke shelling out 1.7 big ones in minimum wage per week. And nobody will be able to afford to buy anything, and nobody will be able to afford to sell anything, and that, I believe, is what Einstein was talking about when he came up with the theory of relativity, in which he clearly states enterprise equals money times the speed of light squared. History proves that when you punish poor people by handing them a minimum wage job, a lot of people vote Democratic, and that means businessmen are afraid to make a profit. So, isn't it logical that we should abolish the minimum wage along with the Democratic Party so that businessmen can get back on their feet again? That, my friends, should be obvious to any idiot, except, of course, a liberal. Chapter 22. Our unique and one-of-a-kind culture. America's culture is unique, and it's one-of-a-kind as well. And I'm just the kind of guy to demonstrate it. And I will, too. You don't see me on street corners wearing $150 tennis sneakers and selling crack to homeless people. That's not the kind of culture I mean when I say that someday America culture will sweep over the world, or the planet, or the biosphere, or whatever you want me to call it, just so long as you believe me when I say that American culture will someday sweep over the entire shooting match. America is sort of like a big laboratory with scientists dressed in smocks going, smock, smock. And our cities are like Petri dishes. Some are bad, and others are worse. But don't let that bother you. The Petri dishes in other countries are even more squalid. In those Petri dishes, the microorganisms get all those expensive social benefits like free broth and free retirement to old age Petri dishes, and the laboratories are going broke trying to keep up with it all, and pretty soon they're going to start to be run on a for-profit basis, except in this country, which is already more than half pinko, according to some distinguished professor of something or other whose name I forget. Folks, isn't it cute how I hate professors and people in academia except when they agree with me and then I quote them? I thought you'd agree. Anyway, it's no coincidence that successful people think like me and refuse in any way to question all the hidebound beliefs of the status quo. Never mind that I'm in my mid-40s, I've been divorced twice, and I've never had any children. They should still believe in me. And everybody who doesn't think like me is, at the very least, a ranting, stoned wheat thins eating, dyed-in-the-wool liberal, and worse. Anyway, how often is it that you see a 317-pound arch-conservative playing the lead role in a romantic feature? Not since they shot the William Howard Taft story. So don't tell me that Hollywood and television and our major publishing firms like Harlequin Romances aren't infested from head to tail with the jungle rot of fire-eating, devil-worshipping fellow travelers, because I just ain't buying it. Not that I have to, since I can watch most of it on cable and network television for only a nominal monthly fee. Let me tell you just a few of these crackpot ideas the liberals pretend to believe in. They say we should respect other cultures. I say my petri dish is bigger than other cultures. They believe in humanism. I say, what's the matter with a little bit or even great big heaping helpings of Godism? They believe in secularism. I say, why don't we let priests run things, even though there's nothing in the Constitution that says we're allowed to? They say that we should treat women like everybody else. That's fine. I respect women as much as anyone else, just so long as they sit down and shut up and don't bother me when I'm trying to read my newspapers. They believe, these liberals, in affirmative action. I say, let the minorities grease the wheels the old-fashioned ways, by out-and-out flattery and bribery in order to get their jobs, just like I did. Liberals want to teach our kids political correctness in the universities. Fine, fine. But I'm going to open up a politically incorrect ice cream parlor right next door. See if I don't. And I'm going to serve up great big heaping helpings of owl and veal and dolphin and chewing tobacco and snail darter ice cream to counteract all this foolish nonsense the professors are teaching our kids. Liberals want to favor homosexuals. Well, I say that homosexuals should stick to what they do best, just so long as they don't do it out in the streets and frighten the horses. Don't they get it? We want them to leave us alone. Liberals believe in being in touch with their inner selves. Folks, I can't even touch my knees, let alone see them, or get down on them to worship at the shrine of some wacky New Age mumbo-jumbo spiritual belief, so I don't even know what they're talking about. And folks, I don't want to. And take it from me, neither do you. Liberals want us all to be fair. Well, fair is fair and foul is foul, as it says in Shakespeare, or maybe it's in the Bible. I'll have somebody look it up and correct it in time for the 3rd edition, since the 2nd edition of this masterpiece, which I never tire of explaining to you, is available at bookstores everywhere, is already rolling hot off the presses even as I speak. And finally, most of all, and last if not least, liberals aren't really interested in everybody getting a fair shake. In fact, liberals don't really seem to be interested in much of anything except wearing earth shoes off in some forest and raising marijuana as a highly profitable cash crop. Now, back in 1979, somebody told me about this, so that's how I know. Anyway, all this stuff the liberals believe, I stand foursquare against. Even though, if you ever actually saw me close up and in person, you would see that I'm actually a pretty round and roly-poly kind of harmless little guy. We don't need affirmative action. How many times do I have to say this to you? We don't need affirmative action. We need a reaffirmation of all the values that made this country great. Rum, the dollar, the whip, and manifest destiny, whatever that is. I remember reading about it in some school book about 30 years ago, back before the liberals had succeeded into brainwashing this country into thinking that this country is nothing special. Anyway, the strange thing about liberals is that somewhere along the line they picked up the notion that this country isn't great and shouldn't get to do whatever the heck it wants to. I say, America, right or wrong. And if you're not on the right, then you certainly are on the wrong side of the tracks, and that means that you're the wrong kind of person to be reading this book. But just in case there are any filthy, low-down, chicken-killing, egg-sucking, sneaky liberal dogs reading this here book, let me, Lush Rambo, tell you one thing. Now I'm going to put you straight on this. We can't have farm animals like you going around and killing the livestock. So don't you go around taking big bites out of our heifers when the rest of the American family is sitting down to a hearty supper after 16 hours of back-breaking labor. Or else Uncle Farmer's going to have to take you off behind the barn and put a bullet right between your gutless eyes. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying, if liberals are so great and smart and good with numbers and handy with figures and such, then how's come I can't find a decent apartment in New York City? Actually, I'd even settle for a sleazy loft, just so long as it had a clean-smelling freight elevator in good running condition. And when I tell liberals the kind of problems I'm having, not that I ever encounter these vermin face-to-face, I mean on my radio show, of course, when I tell liberals the kinds of problems I'm having finding an apartment in New York City, they have the nerve to tell me that everybody has problems finding an apartment in Manhattan. They have the nerve to tell me this, as if I was some ordinary schmo chained to a 9-to-5 desk job at some bankrupt reinsurance company off in Connecticut somewhere. Don't they realize that a wealthy bigwig like me can't even find decent living quarters? And if a wealthy bigwig like me can't find decent living quarters, that means that before too long they'll be living in an empty appliance box over a steam grate down in the West 30s before too long. Especially after I buy their apartment building and evict them from it. Here's another thing that gets my goat. Liberals don't even want to work for what is, to my way of thinking, an extremely generous minimum wage, but they expect rich people to throw money at all their problems, even though they're communists and they don't believe in money or wages or problems or rich people. Go figure, huh? Chapter 23. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. My medium is the massage. In other words, I take my big pudgy hands and ply you with loudly voiced truisms until you enter a state of total relaxation, and then I know I got you right where I want you. Namely, in my hip pocket. And believe me, on days when I wear baggy pants, I can slip 2 or 3 medium-sized dogs in there without even batting an eye. But I hypnotize you the old-fashioned way, by a total disregard for fact, with rhetoric and false irony and mugging in front of the camera and being superficially offensive in order to mask from the undereducated and gullible how truly offensive my beliefs really are. So what if they call me a rabble-rouser and a sore loser and a self-promoting man promoting only my own selfish self-interest in a selfish world? Say, all this selfish talk is making me hungry for some seafood. Will you excuse me just half a second? Anyway, getting back to what I was saying. Who cares about my methodology, just so long as it translates into big ratings, right? You better believe I'm right. Far right. But anyway, all my fancy tricks are done with words, but the liberals have to use smoke and mirrors and props and card tricks that they probably bought for a song off at some bankrupt joke and novelty store back in 1978. That, plus a well-thumbed copy of Nietzsche, Karl Marx, and the Little Red Book of Chairman Mao is what them liberals have up their sleeves, and all they have to do is say presto, and it goes to press as front page news, while I'm lucky to get a blurb in the arts and entertainment section. Anyway, liberals are going to try and tell you that a bunch of stuff that just ain't true is in fact true. So, don't you believe them, folks, for 1 minute. They say Republicans are lousy, the Democrats are a.o.k., and as long as you don't listen to me, Lush Rambo, except to boo and hiss, all will be right with the world. It's just that kind of socialistic, communistic, left-wing, free-thinking, one-world kind of totally dishonest and propagandistic rhetoric that you ought to be on your guard against, and not my brand of sweet-smelling mom's apple pie, brings a smile to the kiddies style logic, which everybody enjoys even if they don't agree with it, and they darn well better, because sooner or later everybody will think like me, and when that day comes, all I can say is, watch out. When that day comes, all the members of the left-wing press that have been boosting Clinton and knocking me in the bargain will find themselves out on the streets, pounding the pavements looking for a real job, even if it means flipping the burgers at some fast food chow-down palace. All those Hollywood loafers will be living in rooming houses run by alcoholic widows, and they'll all be getting dishpan hands dishing out slop at some greasy spoon for a bunch of truck drivers trying to make the first and last month's deposit on the rent. And furthermore, once my program is adopted for good and all those career politicians with soft hands and liver spots will be good for nothing except maybe telemarketing cheap plastic gewgaws at sweatshop wages in a room full of pimply teenagers and illegal aliens. That's the day I'll be able to laugh in their ugly faces and say to them, "So you didn't listen." Chapter 24. This chapter is entitled, Democrats Spend Too Much Money. Democrats spend too much money. I know I sound like a broken record, but the Democratic record speaks for itself. So what am I doing here? How's come I'm not off in some tavern somewhere, getting drunk and shouting these opinions over the soundtrack to some hockey game? Maybe it's because I've always felt uncomfortable addressing small groups. Bush and Clinton are pretty similar. Me and Vladimir Zhirinovsky are pretty similar. We both have about the same number of followers, and we're both regarded as bombastic clowns, and most importantly, people very badly underestimate both of us. Anyway, Bush said he'd cut the deficit without raising taxes. He didn't. Clinton said he'll cut the deficit. He won't. I'd like to see him try. Instead, what I bet he'll do is give all our money to poor people and at the same time tax the rich folks out of existence. Why does this sound strangely familiar? Is it because I said it 100 times? Or is it because Ronald Reagan said it 1,000 times? Now, folks, I'm not an activist. I don't believe in telling Americans how to vote. And yet, just because I have a hate list that's about as long as my ego is big, doesn't make me a vindictive man. I want the president to reduce the deficit, but not in my backyard. Even if Clinton were a man after my own heart instead of a man after my own scalp, he wouldn't have a snowball's chance in heck of reducing the deficit. Not when the Democratic Congress are a bunch of Freddie the Freeloaders who want to rent out the Lincoln Room to the KGB. But when you folks are off paying that deficit in the year 2050, you're going to look back and you're going to say, gee, we should have listened to Lush Rambo. In other words, see? So you didn't listen. Folks, I'm sorry, but I've got to get something to eat. I'm really, really very hungry, so if you'll just excuse me for just half a moment. Let's see now, what do we got here? I hope you don't think I'm rude if I eat this chicken here while I go through the final chapters of my book, which of course is entitled So You Didn't Listen, and of course my name is Lush Rambo. Gee, this one's been pretty much picked clean. Guess I'll have to go for the back meat. They make a pretty good chicken. It's pre-cooked and everything. The meat's kind of yellow. Good. Anyway, here for the first time, so you can stay at home slurping Hereford cows instead of going to boring cocktail parties
and hearing liberals spout their left-wing nonsense, here for the first time are the ABCs of liberal thought. A is for ass, a liberal. B is for bum, a liberal. C is for crackpot, a liberal. D is for dummy, a liberal. E is for evil, liberals. F is for fanatics, liberals. G is for gonads, something liberals don't have. H is for hairy, liberals. I is for ignorant, liberals. J is for Jabberwocky, the liberal philosophy. K is for kooks, liberals. L is for liberals, socialists. M is for morons, liberals. N is for nuts, liberals. O is for oxymoron, the phrase liberal thought. P is for party poopers, liberals. Q is for quacks, liberals. R is for Republican, not a liberal. S is for socialist, a liberal. T is for traitors, liberals. U is for unshaven, liberals. V is for vicious, liberals. W is for wrong, liberals. X is for XXX, liberal moonshine. Y is for Yahoo, a liberal. And Z is for zoos, where liberals belong. I think I better put this here chicken away. I don't know. It might start to go bad if I leave it out. You'll excuse me for just a moment. Oh, the heck with it. I'll just eat the whole damn thing. I don't care. I'm starving. Tell you, this is hard work, folks. Hard work. I'll just swallow it whole, okay? So you don't have to listen to the sound of my chewing. This is good. Boy, I'll tell you. This is a real good snack. Don't let some liberal tell you that it's cruel to eat chicken. That's what they're there for, to be eaten. You think we'd bother having chickens around if they weren't good food? Anyway. This is chapter 26, and it's called Ain't No Stopping Me Now. Don't go away. There's more. After this. This. Hi, I'm back. We have to take a quick break. On the other hand, we better not. Don't go away. We'll have one more quick segment of this when we come back. After this. That was a sample of some of the snappy banter you can see if you tune into my show.
But if you don't tune into my show religiously, there might not be a show anymore. And now I'm going to tell you why. Because they say all kinds of stuff about me, Lush Rambo, that isn't true. Instead of thanking me for bringing AM radio back from the grave, they want to shut me down. And these are the reasons they give. They say I omit facts and distort the issues. I won't tell you who they are because I don't have time, but that's what they say. They say I give preference to people who call from cellular phones. Well, it's my show and I'll do what I want. I know the demographic I'm after. They say I indulge in strident intolerance. I think the people who say that ought to be strung up by their heels on the biggest flagpole in town for saying that about me, Lush Rambo. They say I'm a dead star that sucks the light out of other stars. I'm not sure I even know what they're talking about. Finally, they say that I'm a Pied Piper of fascism and ignorance. Well, I say, let's get 'em, boys! They can't get away with that! Well, now, folks, it's time to wrap it up with this final chapter, and it's called I'm Going Home. Bill Clinton pretends to be a moderate guy, but he's not. He's weak, and I'm strong. And I'm getting stronger every day. And here's why. I believe every hard-working conservative ought to be able to keep every penny they make, especially me. I believe people make mistakes, and make no mistake about it, they should be forgiven for their mistakes, especially me. I believe that people can be awful mean sometimes, and that they should try to be kind, especially to me. The question is, how can we make conservatives even stronger and broaden the base of rugged individualists? Especially me. Well, I'm going home, but not before I leave you with a few thoughts I have as to how you can accomplish this incredibly important task. The task of making me look better by doing what I say. Well, first, kids should go to school and learn and not expect to be paid for it. That will train them to work hard, and then we'll even pay them. And then they can have a few hours a day to blow off steam in their off hours by listening to me. And second, we should teach our children values so they'll know that all the products I hawk on my TV show, like mint snuff and the National Enquirer, are actually good for them and give them a good value for their money. And if they can master hooked on phonics, they can certainly read the American Spectator, which is sort of like Mad Magazine strained through the Reader's Digest, and which is also a lot like the National Enquirer and mint snuff. And third, I think we ought to do something about the environment, like maybe stop talking about it so much, and right there, we'd be doing something about noise pollution. And fourth, let's stop talking about states' rights as though it were a dirty word, because actually, it's two words. And the name of this country isn't the federal government, it's the United States. So let's start acting like it. And fifth, let's support democracies and stuff overseas, but let's not forget that the real money is made by selling weapons to the highest bidder, even if they don't like us very much. Number 6, since everybody hates taxes, let's us say that we hate them too, because we do. Number 7, let's say we're in favor of growth, whatever that means, because nobody in their right minds would say they're against growth, least of all me. Let me tell you something, folks. I used to have one of those POW bracelets. It's now a pinky ring, so nobody can say that I'm against growth. And finally, number 8, let's all learn from the example of a great American, me. It's not enough to be right all the time. You have to have an incessant smile plastered on your face, morning, noon, and night, or people will think you're unhappy with yourself. And I'd rather be jolly and ignorant than have a lean and hungry look and know what a whole lot of nines are. So, to end my presentation, let me just say this, as if you could stop me. My life is like a Horatio Alger story, 150 pages long and full of hard work and inspiration and luck and pluck and fabrications. But it sure has worked out for me. And I hope you have listened very attentively to every single word I said, because if you didn't, then every time you see my beaming face, you'll be haunted by the bombastic, self-promoting, vaguely Midwestern accented voice of a heavyweight pundit and conservative super salesman DJ who is also the last angry white man, as it repeats over and over in the loudest Republican voice on the face of the planet. So you didn't listen. So you didn't listen. So you didn't listen. You have been tuned to the wrong hero and tonight's presentation entitled So You Didn't Listen. You are tuned to Cafe Cabaret, televised at 9 p.m. Thursdays on Cambridge Community Television, Channel 66. Portions of tonight's show are recorded live at the Middle East Cafe at 472 Massachusetts Avenue in Cambridge. Tune in next week to see the wrong hero in the film which the wrong hero says is his greatest achievement, entitled Stigma, recorded entirely live at the Middle East Cafe. You are tuned to Cafe Cabaret. This concludes our broadcast evening. Cafe Cabaret is produced by Francis DiMenno. As a matter of fact, that is me. Good night.